If you're just here for the short answer, no, I'm not biased against Italian swordsmanship, or at least I try not to be. If you want the long answer, here we go. Alright, so the previous video I uploaded was about my opinion on overly complicated techniques with a lot of different steps that require an over-compliant partner to demonstrate, and that would likely fall apart in sparring. And I used a few examples to illustrate the difference between various techniques that require more or less time. And one of the examples I mentioned was taken from Fiore's manuscript, the Italian swordmaster. And two people who practiced the Italian system commented on that video and weren't happy about the way I presented, or I suppose misrepresented, that particular technique, which involves grabbing the opponent's blade, winding your arm around it, and grabbing the guard to control it. I try to always be open for constructive criticism and revise something if I made a mistake. In this case, this is a technique that I've been shown by a Fiore instructor. Like, even though I haven't personally practiced Fiore a whole lot, I've worked with other instructors, and we've had guest instructors at the school where I practiced, and we did sometimes just an entire class on various techniques from Fiore and other systems as well. I don't know where things broke down, if the instructor's interpretation of the source was inaccurate, or if my understanding of it as I was taught was wrong, or if I misremember because it's been a year or two, maybe even 3. Either way, I think there's a useful discussion to be had based on these two comments. First off, let me get one thing out of the way that irked me a little bit. This statement here: HEMA is already full of fanboy people of German systems that are pretty racist with Italians. Can we just not use the R word haphazardly like that? I mean, it's a slap in the face and an insult to everyone who deals with actual real-life racism. Let's be real here. What some sword nerd on the internet says about a medieval manuscript has nothing to do with ethnicity or nationality or anything like that, okay? I hate when people use that label haphazardly, but I also hate when other people claim that nothing in the world is ever racist. Both are extremely wrong, and that's about as political as I get here. Just wanted to get that out of the way. On the other hand, I also realize that a sword nerd who gets several tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of views on a video has a certain influence and needs to be careful with that. And so that is a very valid criticism. If I misrepresent a technique or a system, especially if I end up making an entire system look stupid or ineffective or something like that, I deserve criticism for that. That is not okay. That is not what I'm here to do. And so I've made just a couple of videos about Fiore in particular. In fact, there's one video on my channel where Richard Marsden talks about techniques from Fiore's manuscript. I've made one other video about dual cudgel versus spear and a few other oddities, and otherwise I've made some throwaway remarks here and there. So I haven't talked about Italian longsword a whole lot because my understanding of it is limited. I've been focusing mainly on the German sources, and that is not because of any preference for all things German or anything like that. Just that the longsword is my favorite weapon to practice with. I also like to practice with others, like the Messer, the Dusak. I like way too many things. If I had to pick just one, it would be the longsword, simply because that's what resonates with me the most, and that's what I'm best at. And so if you look at the available sources for longsword, the vast majority of them are German. However, I've also practiced rapier, and if you look at that, you could come to the conclusion that the HEMA community is dominated by Italian fanboys, simply because there are a lot of Italian manuals on rapier fencing. It's basically Italian, Dutch, and Spanish. There's some German in there too, but when I think of rapier, I think Italian primarily. Does that mean I'm biased against German rapier or against Spanish rapier? No, it's just what I've practiced. The rapier fighting I've been taught is based mainly on capoferro and giganti. So, of course, you're going to have a certain bias based on what you've practiced. I like to do what I can to avoid bias, which is why I dabble in all the things I do, even though I personally really like European longsword doesn't mean that I'm not interested in anything else. In fact, you've seen Filipino swords on this channel, you've seen African weapons, you've seen Indian weapons, you've seen Chinese, you've seen Japanese, you've seen all kinds of stuff. And that's how I like it. I like the diversity, and I also think it's a good idea to look at other systems to maybe fill in gaps if there are any, and to compare notes and to see, you know, what works, what doesn't, and then you have a better understanding of the fundamental basics and how much variety there is, because there are certain restrictions in terms of biomechanics. There are only so many effective ways in which you can cut with a sword, for example. There are variations, of course, but some things are more martially viable than others. So another point I want to comment on is what the other person said. We must understand martial arts, not presume. And with that, I agree 100%. Even though personally I'm an entertainer first and HEMA practitioner second, I don't want to use that as an excuse to get away with misrepresenting things, and I want to be held accountable, and it's good to have discussions like that. Now, the difficulty is, this is easier said than done, because for one, the historical manuscripts can be difficult to interpret. There are a lot of things they leave out. The historical manuscripts weren't designed to teach somebody how to fight from the ground up. They were meant to be used alongside face-to-face instruction. And there were a lot of things that they just don't mention, like footwork. Most of the manuals don't go into great detail on footwork, if they mention it at all, because that's just the basic stuff that, you know, your instructor should have taught you. And so it's difficult for us to reconstruct that. It's possible, obviously. And the trick there is that you could come up with multiple interpretations that all work. Maybe one works a little better than the other, and some definitely don't work. That's why you have to test things in sparring, for example. And most HEMA schools and instructors over time change and refine their interpretations. So if you take something that somebody taught even just 2 years ago, there's a chance that they might be doing it different and better now, which is also why I tend to talk more about the general basics of sword fighting as opposed to going really in-depth on specific techniques. Sometimes I'll do that, but the problem with that is always, once you show one interpretation and you put it up on the internet, it's there to stay. And then if you've in a couple of years, if you changed your interpretation and you look back at it like, that wasn't very good, it's still there. The damage is done, so to speak. That's just the nature of it. And this is why I like to remind people every now and then that I don't consider myself an expert. This is not an instructional channel. This is a personal channel. This is where I share my interests and my passions, where I like to, you know, entertain you, inform you as well. So I do my research, sometimes better, sometimes worse, but I'm a flawed human being, a little extra flawed currently. Ups and downs. I've had more of a down lately for a while, but working on it. And yeah, I appreciate the feedback. If you have a HEMA school near you that focuses on Fiore or any other Italian source, you better turn and run. I'm kidding. There's nothing wrong with the Italian sources. Don't pick Lichtenauer or Meyer or whatever other German tradition over Italian swordsmanship just because some dude on YouTube has more experience with a German style. I know enough about Fiore from classes with guest instructors to know that it's a good system. It's a perfectly solid, and when I talk about things from a manuscript in a seemingly derogatory way, keep in mind that I do sometimes go into a bit of a entertainer mode where I pick out things that seem weird because that can be interesting and because that might make for a more entertaining video. And I'm pretty sarcastic by nature. I tend to focus more on the negative things, dwell more on them, talk more about them, rant and joke, etc. That can be good, it can be funny and all, and a lot of people like it, but it can also be a bit of a detriment. It can also be a bit of a personal flaw. But please, for the love of pizza, can we just skip the race card? Can we just, not bring that into things where it doesn't belong? If somebody practices German system or Italian system or Spanish or English, what have you, a lot of people assume, especially if that person happens to be that nationality, a lot of people assume that there's some kind of, genetic connection. And, oh yeah, you practice this. Like, for example, Metatron, he talks about Romans because he's Italian. That's the only reason, right? We need to get away from that. I mean, there is an availability bias here, sure. Because if you can read the sources in your language, that's kind of helpful. The language was different in the Middle Ages, but if you know the modern language, you can at least recognize the words, and most of the time they're still pretty close and you can understand them, and it might be easier for you to remember them. But assuming, for example, that an English HEMA practitioner likes George Silver just because he's English and is biased against the Italians, which admittedly Silver himself was quite a bit, can we just not go for the personal attacks and just assume things? Which reminds me of something else. A Westerner practicing Japanese swordsmanship is not automatically a weeb, okay? The W word is another one of those things that gets thrown around all the time. I see that in my comment section a lot. Way more than actual weebs, by the way. Can we just stop with the weeaboo thing? Just let people enjoy things, okay? If they're interested in Japan or in Japanese swordsmanship or in katanas, whatever, can you just leave them be? Can you just let people enjoy things? If they're being belligerent fools about it, I've seen that too, where somebody's like, there's a reason Western martial arts died out, blah, blah, whatever. Yeah, if they say something stupid like that, by all means, criticize them, quote unquote, pwn them, whatever you want. But just because they're interested in it, just cut it out. I've also seen way too many Westerners talk crap about other swords and other systems. There's a lot of katana hate. In fact, it seems to me that at this point, the katana hate outweighs the katana fanboyism. We're at this point now. It's reached critical mass. So just come on, people. Let others have nice things, okay? Let them enjoy things. Not everybody has to do the same things you do and like the same things you do. All right, rant over. I hope that clarified things a little bit. Again, thank you for the constructive criticism. I appreciate that. I will take it to heart. And thanks for watching. Have a good one, folks.